Welcome on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. So, yeah, I think the microphones are on. Hello, everyone. Thank you for hosting us. Maybe just a short introduction about ourselves.
Yes, my name is Nils Güggi. I'm the head of legal affairs and controlling, as you see here. So everything what is about the law and about the controlling and about the legislation, about the new Büpf and about the ordinances, that was created in my team. So if you have any compliments, you can come to me and make me compliments. If you are more critical, you should address your critics to the Federal Council because it's an ordinance of the Federal Council.
That was, I think Nils summarized all the presentation already, so I'm not sure we will bother with the rest. So I'm Alex Suter. I'm head of the provider management team at PTSS. Some of you might know me already. I think I've attended SwiNOG several times. Before joining PTSS, I had a former life in the Swiss internet industry. So I think it's the 5th or 6th time that I joined SwiNOG, but I'm very pleased to host now a talk. It's the first time I'm hosting a talk. So what is this talk going to be about? The introduction, I think we're already in the middle of the introduction. We'll present the new act on post and telecommunication surveillance. Everyone knows this law as Büpf actually in all languages, in German, in English and French. It's just called Büpf. I think what might be interesting for many people in the room is the so-called downgrade process and also the special cases. We'll get to that. And we've tried to allocate enough time for Q&A session. Let's see how fast we can be with the presentation. Hopefully we'll have enough time to address any questions you might have. But first of all, we would like to start with like a poll or a question from our side. We would like to know, for like statistical purpose, who in the room is working for a company making more than 100 million Swiss francs revenue per year. So there are a few Swisscom employees here. I counted four or five people. That's more or less what we expected. So keep this figure in mind, and we'll get back to it in a short while. So first, who we are. So I think most of you might know us roughly, might know what the post and telecommunications surveillance service is about. So in Switzerland we have this particular model that so-called lawful interception is centralized with a central authority, a central service that is in charge of all matters regarding lawful interception. This includes post. Don't forget post. It's a small part of our job, but you can still monitor the letters and the parcels. Post and telecommunications surveillance in the course of criminal investigations. Since September last year, this has been extended also to cover the Federal Intelligence Service. Search for missing persons. So this is a trend that we observe, that more and more we have each year more and more search for missing persons thanks to telecommunication surveillance, typically people who get missing in the mountains or so. New from this year, the tracing of convicted persons, although this hasn't been used much, I think, so far, but in theory that possibility exists. And information requests concerning communication services, so the police might want to know whom a certain phone number belongs or what kind of telecom service a certain person is using. We have a website since 8 years now, I think. When we started having let's say a more open communication policy, we launched our own website. It's available in 5 languages, so the 4 official languages plus English. You should know that English is not an official language, so all translations that are provided just as a service to the general public, but the translations are not binding. The English translations are not binding. Unfortunately, the English and Romansh content on the website are a bit behind the other 3 languages. So if you can't find a specific information on the English or Romansh version of the website, please switch to German, French, or Italian. These are usually the most up-to-date ones. But we're constantly adding content and trying to, with our limited resources, trying to keep the page up to date and with most relevant content. This is our location. So we are based here in Bern, actually at the other side of Bern. It's a very nice building in Bern, Bümplitz Nord. If you know a bit the city, that's towards the west side area where you see the giant slides, and so they're just too far away that we can actually go there during the lunch break. But that's where our offices are. We welcome visitors, so if you are interested in having a bilateral talk with us, you can always get in touch with my team, and we'll be happy to host you at.
While you're visiting us, you will realize the building is from inside as beautiful as from outside. So.
Yes. So how are we organized? So the PTSS is organized in three departments, and these departments are organized according to the stakeholder groups. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the internal organization, but just that you get a rough idea of how we work. So we are about 60 full-time equivalent, and roughly separate into 3 departments with about 20 people each. Legal Affairs and Controlling is the Nils department, in charge of finance and controlling, all the legislation work. Public Relations, this includes also questions from the general public or questions regarding the transparency law. Project Management, we have a couple of big IT projects going on at the moment. So overall, the stakeholder group offices, citizens, and press. Surveillance Management, which is led by Jean-Louis Büberstein, is really the team processing the actual interception orders. So if you receive a surveillance order, it will be from that team. They also deal with invoicing and compensations. You might know that for every surveillance measure, the provider is entitled to a compensation, and the authority requesting it has to pay a fee. And that team also provides training for law enforcement. So yeah, they are responsible for the stakeholder group law enforcement authorities. And the last big department is mine, so that's so-called provider management department. We are in charge of ensuring that all the bases are there to make the surveillance work. That includes technical specifications, that includes compliance assessment for providers. Special cases, I'll get back to that later. And we're also in charge of application and supplier management for all the IT systems run by PTSS. So our stakeholder groups, the stakeholders we are in charge of are the service providers, so that's you guys in this room, and all the different suppliers. There's a fourth department that is at the moment only staffed by 1 person, so therefore it's not on the organization chart yet. But that's the person in charge of prosecution according to administrative criminal law. That's maybe the bad news with the new law is that there's now more possibilities to take coercive measures to enforce the law, and also punitive measures. So if a provider would not comply with an order or generally not comply with the law, there are some possibilities to prosecute that provider according to administrative criminal law. We'll say a few words on that as well later. So PTSS, as I said in the introduction, is a central authority and is also acting like a middleman between, on one hand, the authorities requesting surveillance, requesting information requests, so that's the prosecution authorities at all levels, and also the Federal Intelligence Service. and on the other hand, all the communication service providers. This is actually a we see it at least as a big advantage for everyone involved, because we are like a single point of contact. So the prosecution authorities only need to talk to us. They don't need to know who is working at which provider and so on. And for the communication service providers, it's also an added security element, because you know whatever comes from PTSS is according to the legal process, and everything else is not. So again, for the communication service providers, your only point of contact regarding lawful interception is PTSS. As well, when we send an interception order, it will always be an interception order from PTSS. You don't get to see which authority requested it. So again, this adds some security, because you know that the only interception orders that you need to execute are the ones sent by PTSS. So Nils will now explain a bit how this works in more details.
As you can see, yes, I'm even still a little bit more the paper guy, so the lawyer. Always, if you have questions, we both will be ready to answer, so he will be ready to answer. But if you have any questions, also by the lunchtime, we forgot to mention, we got 3 people here. They are experts in everything we do, so you can also ask your questions to them. So if we're not having enough time to answer everything, we are happy to answer the questions also by lunchtime. So now we start to have a look a bit more detailed into the law. First of all surveillance, if police or the prosecutor wants to make a surveillance, there has to be a serious offense. It is always the public prosecutor who can order a surveillance. It's not the police, it's only the prosecutor. At the end, it's also a court that has to say yes or no to this surveillance. So without the court, the surveillance will not work. So you see there, I have a pointer. Yes, techniques. Voila. So we started here. We have the serious offense. We have the public prosecutor who gave the order to make surveillance. The compulsory measures court, also das in German das Zwangsmaßnahmengericht, who says yes or no. And we have PTSS, what does everything to make it happen. Then we send.
So PTSS will also check that the serious offense is listed in. There's a list of offenses that allow surveillance measures. So when PTSS receives the order, we will check 2 things: that it comes from a public prosecutor and that the legal criteria are met, so that there is really a serious offense listed in the catalog of offenses.
Exactly. And we send it to the CSP, and CSP will tell us if it works, if they did, if data can be sent. And at the end, the police, helping the prosecutor, can access to our system and listen or read what happens or what happened while the surveillance was ongoing. Questions? In this process, because this process is important to understand. And it's also, say?
Yeah, the last step is the confirmation from the...
Of course. There is the court. The court is not as fast as... The court is not so fast, or has some time. It has 5 days to decide whether the surveillance is okay or not okay. These 5 days are in the law. Did I forget anything else? Don't think. But again, if you have questions to this process, you should ask them now, because these questions are important for anything else what comes after.
Waiting for the microphone.
Because if we didn't explain it well enough, the rest of what I'm telling you will not make sense. Sorry, Simon.
So, Chris from Switch, the 5 days, is this like, does
No. Yeah, I know what you want to ask.
Yeah.
I think no, no. Surveillance won't wait. As soon as we get the order from the prosecutor, we make it happen, and there can be 5 days while it runs, and the court says at the end no, then we cut it and we clean it. But while these 5 days, one could have access to surveillance without that the court already said that it is okay to do the surveillance. It was the question, no?
But the law explicitly says what happens with the information that was gathered during these 5 days in case the court denies permission for the surveillance. So basically, the information gathered cannot be used further in the investigation.
What's most important for you now is this point. Ask us. If you have any questions, if you're not certain what to do, if you're not certain what kind of obligations you have, of kind of duties, how you can do it or not, or if you should do it or not, you just contact us. You contact us by phone, by mail, or using the contact form on our website, because this is important to us as well as for you and the authorities. It is a legal obligation we have that we advise both authorities and you, so saying persons obliged to cooperate, the POC, or in German we call them MVP, Mitwirkungspflichtige. And this is important for us as well, and this is quite a big part of our business to help as well you to understand and to examine it all. Yes, and this point is important as well because in the past we could see a race of the so-called Editionsverfügungen, what were sent to you also asking for stuff that you should only be asked by the Büpf. So it was important for us as well to include this rule here, that everything what police and prosecutors can get by the Büpf, they have to get by us. So we, as Alex said before, we are your single point of contact in this kind of things. If you're not sure if it is something what falls on the Büpf, you call us, you ask us, and we will help you.
And it's free of charge.
And it's free of charge. This one is free of charge. Not everything is free of charge, but this one surely
Our advice is free of charge. Yeah.
The advice. And as we said as well, we have a website with statistics. So if you're interested in how it happens, what happens exactly, we have a website. We have on our website all the statistics online. So you see how many surveillance in real time, surveillance in retained data, how many questions of police for asking for numbers or for identity cards or something else, and you see them split by canton, or you see how many providers are involved and this kind of stuff. So basically everything here. Of course, we're not telling which number we were doing under lawful interception for how long time, but statistically you can find everything on this page.
There's actually an Excel spreadsheet with every single surveillance measure that has been requested. So you can also make up your own statistics if you don't like ours. And actually some people do it.
But this is an important point for us. We, of course, as we do lawful interception, we cannot talk about everything we do or every surveillance measure we do. But at least we can guarantee a minimal transparency for what we do and how we're doing it. So to show you what we're doing it and to allow the discussion in our society, how much we want and what we don't want. So this is important for us. The legal basis. So you see lots of paper here. We got the Constitution, of course.
I've got them here as well.
Voilà. All the papers in French, yes, but you can find them online, of course. We got the Constitution, what says what our fundamental rights are, and one fundamental right is the right of privacy in the Article 13. And the Article 36 says how you can do restrictions to fundamental rights. So these are in the Constitution the most important, for us, the most important two rules. Then you have, of course, the Criminal Code, you have the Criminal Procedure Code, these 10 or 12 articles what are relevant for our business, 269 to 267. And at the end, you have the Büpf, so the Federal Act on Surveillance of Post and Telecommunication Service. And the Büpf, at least, this is at the end our big law, our big act. Of course, you have also what Alex said, the Federal Intelligence Service, what can work with us. So his law has also some, has also given competences to the FIS, so he can work with us. Then we have the three ordinances what are by the Federal Council, the Büpf, the GEPV, Üpf, and the VVS. Üpf, yes, always this U. It's very hard to type it. And you have this two here and this two here. They might be in this one here and his annexes, the VD Üpf. They might be very important for you as well, because they are the old guidelines. So all the technical stuff only in English, they are there inside and on our website. So it basically rules everything, I guess, what we do with you.
Yeah, so you have the ordinance on the execution of post and telecommunication surveillance, the VD Üpf, which is in German, French, Italian. You get it on our website as well. And there are two technical annexes in English, which is mainly references to ETSI and 3GPP standards that then define the interfaces for the surveillance, so the standardized interfaces between the communication service providers and PTSS.
Usually all federal acts and ordinances, they are published only in German, French and Italian, and only this language count, but with this annexes here, it's only the English what counts and there are no translations. So if you find the English version, you get the right one. Well, the new Büpf. There were two goals, what the Federal Council and at the end the Parliament were telling. It was, first one, suspected offenders should not be able to evade surveillance by law enforcement authorities through the use of modern technology. It sounds a bit like public relations. It sounds like I'm giving you some nice words, and but it is really important. It is exactly what's the plan of this new act. And the second one is the old law was from 2002, I think. I think I had a Nokia something using as my cell phone. Tells you how old this law was, and it was certainly necessary to provide a new law, a modern law, respecting all the conditions of our constitution. So, modernizing. What did we do then? Or what did the Federal Council do?
And the Parliament.
And the Parliament at the end. And then the Federal Council again with the ordinances. But the Act, the Büpf. We got now clear definitions of the obligations per category of person obliged to cooperate. So that means we got still the post. Yes, Alex said they are not. It's not very high rates the surveillance they're doing with us, but it still works. And
About 100 per year, I think.
I think 100 per year, and there's no encryption. So I think, if I'm right, post surveillance is even higher than internet surveillance for the moment.
Certainly, there are certainly more surveillance of postal communications than surveillance of internet content.
More precise, thanks. The PTSS, so our service, we have now officially the supervision of the compliance with the legislation. So we can contact you, we can test with you if you are able to do everything what we want. But as we said, it's obligations per category of person obliged to collaborate, so not everyone has the same obligation. Alex will explain that a little bit more precisely a bit later. And as Alex already mentioned, we got the competence of prosecution of offenses according to administrative criminal law. Basically, one of the most important thing is that we can prosecute a person who sells a SIM card without doing proper identification of the person behind. What is a real problem for police? As Alex said, the police can now ask us tracing of convicted persons. So if they evade of the prison, they can ask us to help them trace down them. At the moment, it is still like that all surveillance measures at the end are burned on a DVD and sent by post to prosecutor and police. And some of them put them on their system again, and others, I guess, will put them in the tray or somewhere else in the paper. And for the future, the Parliament and the Federal Council wants that there is a central storage of all intercepted data. So meaning 30 years plus, they have to be readable, they have to be hearable, and they have to be usable for proof, as a proof if everyone wants to use them again.
So PTSS is basically tasked with setting up a cloud storage for archiving interception data.
Exactly. And this is important as well for the law and for the prosecutors, and as well important for us. It's not done by the PTSS, but with the new Büpf, we got a steady legal basis for the use of IMSI catcher and the use of govware by police and by prosecutors. It's not something we are doing, or we would have any task by doing it, but it is important that this new law introduced as well this kind of surveillance measures. As I said, at the end comes the Federal Council again, and he has put some new ordinances into force. There we have precise definition of all types of surveillance and information requests. Police and prosecutors sometimes tell us they're even too precise for them, but we think it is important that in this kind of matters you are precise and it is clearly ruled what is possible. As well, we got new identification obligations. So the general obligation is to identify the users. Now you have to make a difference. With mobile, so if you sell a SIM card for mobile communication, these providers, they have the obligation to ask for ID, passport, ID, something like that. They have to make a proper identification. Is it really the guy what is standing in front of me? Because this is quite something not everyone does very well. They have to make a copy. This copy has to be readable. This is also something what in the last years didn't work. At the end, the copy was black, faxed and faxed and faxed. Doesn't help much to the police. And to end, they have to save this copy, so police can ask for this copy and see which identity card was presented when someone was buying this SIM card. This is also a condition to make the second one. We got new indirect identification of public VLAN users. We come after in the next slide. We will talk a bit more detailed about this point. And Alex will talk about a little bit later about the up and downgrade of providers. I'll let him for him. We got a new flexible name search, because you can't imagine how police has to search in our old system. It takes a long time to search. It takes a long time till you get an answer. If you are really unfortunate as police officers, you get it by fax. So it's not the kind of system we would like to provide for police and prosecution to do so. And behind this stands as well then the automation of information requests. It is important for us that it is important for the police that the police doesn't have to wait so long for the answer. And if you are a provider with reduced obligations, Alex will tell you, you are not obliged to deliver your answers to information requests automatically. In this case, you can use email, or you can even you can upload it in the system.
The web interface.
In the web interface manually. But if you like, you can do it automatically as well. So you got more possibilities there, and at the end, it should be better information and quicker for the police and prosecutors. Of course, we want as well go in this way. We are working together with prosecutors and police. Police and prosecutors are not, for them, digitalization is a goal as well. For the courts, it is still a little bit harder, but at the end, it is really, we would like to do everything digital. We would like no more faxes, please. Not from them, not to them, not to you, not from you. At the end, this is the purpose of the thing. And yes, it costs for the police and for the prosecutors. And with the new Büpf, it costs even more, about 60 or 70% more than before the 1st of March 2018. So this is a point where prosecutors and police are not very happy yet, of course. VLAN. Well, a VLAN access point, from our point of view, can be considered public or not public, of course, as well as professionally operated or not. And if a VLAN access point is both, so public and professionally operated, the CSP has to identify the users, but only by an indirect authentication. So the user of this public and professionally operated VLAN doesn't have to come to you and to show his ID. No, really not. But for example, as it works like with SBB, doing it with the registration by SMS, or at the airport with the board card, or at the hotel with the hotel room number, something like that. But there are no restrictions. We are not saying how you have to do that. It is only important for us that at the end, police has a chance to identify the user. So public is if it provides network access to third parties. So this is the fundamental thing. And professionally operated it is if it is operated by a legal or natural person, by a VLAN specialist, or by someone who operates several public VLAN access points in multiple locations. But I know we have, for this as well, we have something on our website. We have a wireless LAN information sheet on our website. There you can look up and try to understand what you have to do. So you find there the answer to who has the obligation to identify really the users, what is meant by suitable means of identification. So all this kind of identification possibilities, and you find examples for each situation. And again, this kind of things, if you have questions, just come and ask. I think Fabian may confirm it. I think we have 2 or 3 questions every week about VLAN. Someone who's coming and asking us, hey, we plan to do this, or we already doing that, or we're a hotel and we're doing it like that. Is it working for you? What do we have to do? Is it compliant or not? And of course, we advise them and tell them what they could do or what not. Then we have a second point, what has also brought up in the media. Well, VLAN was brought up in the media before. It was discussed in the media, and this one as well, not very broadly, but as we told you before, we got new categories of person obliged to cooperate with us in the context of telecommunication surveillance. The first thing, you find all that in Büpf article number 2. We got we got the post. I think no one here is from the post. We got the telecommunication service providers, the TSPs, and we got the providers of derived communication services. These two are sometimes hard to see where the difference is. We got as well the operators of internal telecommunication networks. That's old. That was before also in the Büpf. We have the persons who make their access to a public telecommunications network available to third parties, and we have the professional retailers of cards and similar stuff. But the hard thing is to make the difference between telecommunication service providers, TSPs, and provider of derived communication services, so the PTSS in English. What is very important here is PTSS is not the same as an OTT. It is not the same as an OTT. An OTT can also be a TSP. So one of the fundamental misunderstandings is to say that the PTSS is an OTT. This is not as it is built in the law. The provider of derived communications, you see the legal definition. They are not telecommunication service, but nevertheless allow one-way or a multipath communication. So it could be an online storage, file hosting, a service for uploading, sharing content. But at the end, we didn't find very much examples what can really fall under PTSS. Mostly the companies are TSPs. But as well here, you find an information sheet, what explains what the definitions are, what the conditions are, and what tries to make here the difference for you clear. And if you have any questions, you come and ask us.
So, as Nils said earlier, there's not only these new categories of persons that have to collaborate, there's also within the specific categories there are separate levels. So I'll try to explain that. So the old situation with the old law, it was very black and white. So either you were a TSP or not, either you had all the obligations or none at all. So with the old law, there were about 400 or maybe more providers who had the full obligations. That means that probably every single company represented here in this room had the exact same obligations as Swisscom or Sunrise. In theory, that would have meant high costs for all these companies, high investment costs with little use, because as you can see from our statistics, 99% of the surveillance cases are within 4 or 5 companies. So the fact that there was no consideration for the company size, that was really an issue with the old law. On the other hand, this was very theoretical because these obligations were largely ignored. Many smaller companies did not even know that they had these obligations, or they chose to just not bother with them because there were little consequences. So with the new law, the Parliament, the Federal Council, and so on, tried really to address this issue, so to account for the fact that, yes, indeed, a small local ISP has not the same capacity as Swisscom, and it doesn't make sense that they have the same obligations. So, as a consequence, there is now this possibility to apply for a so-called downgrade of obligations. But on the other hand, there's also less possibilities to just not bother and ignore the law, because as Nils explained earlier, PTSS now has the legal duty to enforce the law and to prosecute offenses against the surveillance law. And this can now have much bigger consequences. First of all, it means a fine up to 100,000 Swiss francs, which can be quite high for a small company. But also, according to administrative criminal law, usually the prosecution does not go against the company, but it goes against a physical person. And as soon as the fine is at least 5,000 francs, that physical person will also get a criminal records extract. So this is another thing to consider, why these new legal provisions have to be taken seriously. But overall, we see it as a big advantage for small and medium businesses. If you remember before, we asked how many people in this room were working for companies making more than 100 million revenue. Was about 4 or 5 people. We have about 100 persons in the room, so we get exactly this figure of 95% of the providers are now eligible for this so-called downgrade. And the downgrade of obligations really means you have much less investments to do, you have much less obligations. But it should be noted that this downgrade does not happen automatically. You need to request it. So how does it work? Again, for the 2 different categories, so for telecommunication service providers, by default, you have all the obligations. That means, like the old situation, by default, you need to be ready proactively to deliver data. You need to store retained data for 6 months. You need to store carrier-grade NAT information for 6 months as well. You need to deliver information requests over an automated interface and within a very short time frame, and so on. So these are really quite strong obligations. If you apply for a downgrade, and if your downgrade request is approved, you have reduced obligation. That means no more retained data, no more obligation to do any surveillance, and much longer delays to answer information requests, plus no obligation to automate the information request. So you can see there's really a big difference whether or not you have received this downgrade status. For the provider of direct communication services, it's the exact opposite. So by default, you have reduced obligations, but there is the possibility to get an upgrade. In that case, we assume that it will not necessarily be spontaneously requested by the providers, but the criteria are mainly the same. So again, it's 100 million revenue. For PTSS, there is additionally the criteria that you need at least 5,000 users to qualify for an upgrade. So TSP, the bar is 100 million revenue, no limit on the amount of users. PTSS, the bar is at 100 million revenue as well, but with the additional bar at 5,000 users. For TSP, there's no downgrade. You cannot escape information request obligations, but you get longer deadlines, and you don't need to store carrier-grade NAT information. For PTSS, there's a separate upgrade for information requests and for surveillance. So we don't really necessarily have time to go in very deep in all the details and so on, but you can check Article 22 and 51 for the and 52 as well for this upgrade and downgrade. So 51 is for the TSP, 22 and 52 for the PTSS. The important thing is particularly for the TSP, the downgrade does not happen automatically. So you only get this, let's say, legal protection if you apply for it and if there is a decision that you really qualify for the downgrade. I mentioned the revenue limit. There's another limit, is that if a provider would be particularly relevant for law enforcement, then they cannot get a downgrade. That is a measure because the bar of 100 million is quite high. There are really not many companies in Switzerland in the telecom industry making more than 100 million revenue. So because the bar is quite high, there's a second trigger that prevents you from requesting a downgrade, and that is if you have surveillance orders for more than 10 different targets over 1 year. So even if you are a very small provider, you have only 20 customers, but half of them are targeted by law enforcement, then you cannot use the fact that you are a small provider to attract those interesting targets. At the moment,
Exactly.
we haven't seen that that case, but that's you need to know that there's this limit. For the information request for the PTSS, the limit is at 100 information requests. So if a PTSS gets 100 information requests regarding 100 separate targets within 1 year, then they qualify for an upgrade, regardless of their size. Yeah, there are many criteria. As I said, check if you have questions, check the text. The reference are there in the slides. We will distribute the slides, of course. They will be available on the SwiNOG website, I guess. So just to summarize the downgrade process, that's an important point. So it's done via the extranet. We have an extranet. I'll come to that. You need to supply some proof that you meet the requirements. We then check that, and then there is a decision. As with every decision, according to the administrative procedure, you can appeal the decision if you are not happy. But if you look at the figures, so far we have 115 requests that we have processed. We were able to approve 114 of them. So in most cases, I mean, you know whether you meet the criteria or not. I have to say the one that was declined, well, the company did not meet the revenue criteria. So they applied for downgrade, but they make more than 100 million revenue 2 years in a row, so they cannot get the downgrade. They still applied for it. That's okay, you can try. So yeah, 99% of the TSP that filed a request now benefit from these reduced obligations. We think that there are many TSPs who maybe don't know that they need to apply for that, or maybe haven't done it yet. Please do so. You don't actually need a lawyer to do that. You just call us, you receive a username and password, you use that to connect on our extranet, and as you can see from the screenshot, you basically click a button, you upload a PDF with a copy of your revenue figures, and you press the button that is called Request Downgrade. That's pretty easy, actually. We really try to make it straightforward, but you need to request it. It's not automatic.
A lawyer isn't very helpful at this moment. That's true. The lawyer will be helpful at the end if you're not happy with our decision, but not before.
So what happens, because, I mean, as we said, we assume that 95% of the companies in Switzerland qualify for downgrade. That means they actually don't need to do much. They need to answer information requests, and that's about it. They don't need to store retained data. They need to cooperate in case there is a surveillance order. What does that mean? Well, that basically means they need to open the door. They need to give us access to the data that we need to intercept, and they need to cooperate in setting up the interception. So how does that work? We call these interceptions special cases. Why special case? Well, because it's really a very small amount of cases compared to the overall amount of surveillancing. We have about 10,000 surveillance, historical and real time per year, and we maybe have probably 20 or 30 special cases. By the way, if you have questions regarding special cases, the head of the special cases team is here today. It's David Kelly, the guy with the white shirt. One of our specialist engineer. He has a long career in the telecom industry as well, and he will be happy to answer any practical questions you may have regarding special cases. But basically, how does it work? It always starts with an interception order, unless we receive an interception order, as Nils showed in the flow before. Well, we cannot do anything. Once we receive the interception order, we will contact the provider and we'll see what possibilities there are to execute the order. For that reason, we need a person of contact. We call these the so-called LI officers. This is the person that needs to register with us in order to be able to apply for the downgrade. So you see that everything is connected. So we will get in touch with the LI officer. We will then do an assessment together. So what can we do? We have this surveillance measure. Is there any available interception point where we can get that? Do you have a switch where you can do a mirror port, or do we need to install some tap or whatever? So what equipment do we need? What cable length? So very practical considerations. Once this assessment is done, then well, either we need to go on site or not. I would say in about half of the cases we need to go on site. So we have boxes. We have you see the picture with the red car. That's actually a mobility car. So we have a corporate mobility car. This is very convenient because what you need to know is these special cases, usually they happen on a Friday afternoon, and usually they happen either in St. Gallen or in Geneva. So typically you don't want to drive from Bern to St. Gallen on a Friday afternoon, so we tend to take the train and do the last mile with mobility. This is just an example of hardware that was prepared for one of these special cases. As I said, this is done in cooperation with the provider. We try to find the best solution for everyone, and also according to the urgency. So again, you need to imagine that the cases that happen on Friday afternoon, sometimes there are some urgent cases because there is an imminent threat. And in that case, quite often it lasts until quite late Friday evening until everything runs. But luckily, we have only 3 or 4 such cases every year. Ready for activation, network connectivity, and so on. Cancellation, so basically, as with any interception order, it stays active until proven otherwise. So the public prosecutor actually needs to renew the authorization from the compulsory measure courts every 3 months. So we check that. The court can authorize surveillance for at most 3 months at a time. Sometimes they authorize it for less than 3 months as well. But from the point of view of the provider, there's like an order to activate and at some point an order to deactivate. So you don't need to worry about it until we contact you to tell you that it has to be deactivated. That's about it. So we, depending on whom is representing the company, we thought we should add an executive summary. This is, from our point of view, the most important things you should take away from this presentation. If you meet the criteria, please apply for downgrade. This, in case of issues, this will save us a lot of legal hassle to prosecute you. We don't want that if it's not needed. The second point is, if you have any question, please get in touch with us. We're happy to help. As I said, it's free of charge, and you do whatever you want with the advice that we provide you. So we are happy to help, to offer our advice. We're happy to meet you and to check anything that you send us. A reminder that we have this website where you find quite a number of information, and where you can request an extranet login as well as a contact form, or just talk to one of the people from PTSS that are present today. So that brings us to the Q&A session. Simon will tell us how much time we have left. Hopefully we have enough time to address all the questions.
About 10 minutes. First I have a question to Daniel Stirnimann. Where are you? Okay, could you please get your microphone? Who was it?
I have one question in the whole thing. Given I operate a professional Wi-Fi obliged to identify the user, but I downgrade it, so I don't have to do any carrier grade NAT logging. That doesn't make any sense anymore.
Well, depending on the use case, it might still make sense if at some point there was only one user connected, or I mean, one can imagine cases where it would be useful. But that is true. It is a limitation of the provision. The alternative would have been carrier grade NAT records for everyone, and that is not something we found would be proportionate. So let's say it's a compromise.
Hi, Will. I've got a small question. I see that we have the same username and password on our Wi-Fi badge here. So it's a professionally operated Wi-Fi network, and so it should be subject to identification, but I'm not sure that you will be able to identify all the devices. So maybe it's just a loophole, but yeah, I had to mention it.
So that's not a question, if I understand it correctly. It's just a statement.
Well, I have a question regarding the statistics. I'm happy to see that you do also statistics. There is one thing that I'm missing. So there is no statistic regarding the prosecution rate. So what is the reason why you don't provide this? And do you plan to provide this in the future? If yes, yeah, it's good. And if no, why
With
not?
prosecution rate, you mean?
It's like how many surveillances led to a prosecution? I mean, other countries are providing the statistics, but obviously the PTSS doesn't.
Well, first, too simple answer. This is a too simple answer. Is we don't know what happens after in the process, because that's not our part. We do not prosecute. We do not make the decision of the court at the end. But it's a too simple answer, I know. The other thing is, it is always the question, surveillance. What's at the end the
deciding factor, or the you mean? I guess when you say prosecution, you mean actually conviction.
Yes.
Because prosecution, in all the cases, there is a prosecution. Without prosecution, you cannot do surveillance. But the conviction rate, it's hard to tell in which case the surveillance was the deciding factor for the conviction.
Exactly. The question is always, is lawful interception successful or not? Should we continue because it is successful, or should we not continue because it doesn't help anything, or then we can let it? No, I mean, it goes in this direction. But if you see a criminal process, lawful interception is just a little part of it. So at the end, if in a case a legal interception, a surveillance was done, and the guy at the end gets convicted, is it a success or not? Don't know. Was it the legal interception what made it successful, or was it other things? That's the first question. And legal interception is not only to prove you're guilty, it's also to prove you're not guilty. So is it a success if legal interception shows no, it wasn't him, he wasn't there, or his mobile phone wasn't there, he probably wasn't it. So is it a success as well? In my opinion, it is a success of legal interception is to show someone is not guilty. But there are several kinds of difficulties to do this. You're right. We didn't yet publish this kind of statistics, and we didn't find out yet for us how we could do it to really say it was successful or not.
Hi, I'm working for an IT company, and we are providing IT infrastructure services for small businesses who are too small to have their own IT staff. So typically we go out and install a Wi-Fi network for a customer, a small cafe or a company who opens a Wi-Fi access for their guests. So clearly we are professionally managed because we do the firmware updates and install the stuff and look after it. But actually the company itself is the one providing the Wi-Fi access. How does that make us an obligation to identify the users or not? I'm not getting a clear answer out of your FAQ document.
That's actually a fairly common situation where you have actually one company, let's say, marketing the service or selling the service, offering the service, but the service is actually operated by a separate entity. But in that case, so the obligation lies within the company offering the service, but of course they cannot fulfill their obligation without your support. So let's say the legal obligation lies with the company providing the service, but of course they need to have a contract with you to make sure that you can support them so that they can comply with the law.
But every case you have to. It's really like it's really different because every case is special, and we have. In your case, I guess we should discuss it bilaterally and show and then we can ask questions and see what is it really, because in this short discussion, I don't think it is very serious if we give you here an answer yes or no. This is not possible. It takes more time. No lawyer, but more time. A lawyer on our side.
More questions?
I'm curious on the Wi-Fi when there's the authentication, which is common here. You see always with the phone number authentication, which is obviously not very secure. I mean, maybe in Switzerland it's a bit harder, but I have tons of SIM cards from other countries lying around with like no personal data given there. So I'm wondering, as this is like really tons of loopholes around it, like why does it even make sense to do that? Or what kind of other potential authentications are kind of allowed? Is there any specific rules?
Well, first of all, I recommend you check the information sheet, the wireless LAN information sheet on our website. We give some examples, we give some guidelines, what is a good mean or not. And yes, of course, there will always be loopholes. Again, it's a question of proportionality. Do we want to restrict it to only SMS and only Swiss numbers? This could lead to some other issues. At the moment, we really chose to have quite open rules and let every provider decide or find a solution that makes sense to them and that they can confidently live with. And I would say solution is acceptable until proven otherwise. And yes, this indirect authentication is a compromise. It's like the story with the providers who don't need to store NAT logs. At the moment, we think that statistically it will not lead to significant issues. Of course, if all of a sudden this should lead to significant issues, then there could be a change in the law. That is a possibility that is still there.
So if I can have a follow-up question. So if I would run like an internet cafe, and I would also have, like as an example, a message board where people can send like to a specific text number, like phone number, like text messages, which could then be used for like authentication codes. Everyone could basically use the same number. Would that be something against the law because it's like actually helping them to circumvent it, or?
I didn't really understand your use case, sorry.
Think about it, if somebody runs like public internet hotspot, but I would at the same time, I would put up like here is like a big display there here. If you text anything to this phone number, basically will show up there because maybe let people to put their own messages up.
But that is
now it gives now an easy way for obviously having a code like shared.
That's exactly the advantage of the way that is defined in the law. In the law, we said you need to identify the users with appropriate means, and obviously this would not be an appropriate mean to identify the user. So, in my opinion, it would not be compliant with the law.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your attention, and we'll be here. We'll be around, and the presentation will be on the SwiNOG website.
And the video.